The nights in Decatur were never truly quiet. They were only a calculated pause in the noise. In Stephen's bedroom, the digital clock glowed with cold red numbers, 2:00 a.m. Then the harsh blue light of a phone screen suddenly sliced through the darkness, washing over the sleeping face of an aging man. For most people, it would have been an annoyance. But for a family lawyer with 31 years of experience, it was a red alert. Stephen reached for the phone. The light flared across eyes long accustomed to reading the fine print in contracts. "I'm 63 years old now. I've spent 31 years practicing family law. Nothing good ever comes through a phone call at 2 in the morning. Never. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and remember this. The people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they just chose not to. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. You're going to like it here." He sat up, his back straight, his mind shifting instantly into evidence analysis mode, even as sleep still clung to him. On the other end of the line was a sound like an engine that would not start. It was Skyla crying, not the pouty crying of a child throwing a tantrum. This was choked, broken, sobbing, trembling with the terror of a soul, abandoned in an ocean of darkness. Stephen kept his voice steady and objective. It was the same weapon that had helped him win hundreds of brutal divorce cases. "Skyla, breathe, sweetheart. Give me the facts. Where are you? Where are your parents?" A long silence followed, a silence as heavy as betrayal. It filled the room, so heavy that even the heartbeat of a seasoned lawyer seemed to skip. "They're gone. Dad, Mom, and Alex. They went to Florida. To Disney World. Without me." The room seemed to lose all its air. Inside Stephen's mind, a systematic pattern of behavior was already taking shape. He didn't need to hear any further explanation. He knew Anthony, his son, had performed a cruel subtraction. He had removed the inconvenient variable, Skyla, all to create the perfect trip for the remaining three. The contrast was brutal. On one side, the dazzling lights of Disney World. On the other, an 8-year-old girl alone in an empty house in Marietta. "Who did they leave you with?" Stephen asked, already reaching for his car keys on the nightstand. "No one," Skyla replied. "They said I had a fever, so it was better if I stayed home. They left pizza in the fridge, but I can't open the microwave." Every sentence from the 8-year-old, spoken with the weary tone of someone far older, was hard evidence. Clear and undeniable. Systematic child abandonment. Stephen glanced at the map forming in his head. From Decatur to Marietta, 35 miles. At 2 in the morning, with almost no traffic, it would take exactly 42 minutes. "Skyla, listen to me," he said. "Go into your room and lock the door. Leave the lights on. I'm on my way. I won't hang up until I'm standing at your front door. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice as faint as wind slipping through a crack in the door. "Good. We're going to handle this," Stephen said calmly. "The way winners do." He stood up and slipped on a neatly pressed shirt. Even in the middle of the night, he wasn't going to rescue his granddaughter like a helpless old man. He was going to collect evidence for a family indictment that could never be undone. The truth had now been exposed, and attorney Stephen Collins had never lost a case when he held the evidence firmly in his hands. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You'll definitely enjoy the next stories waiting for you here. Stephen gripped the steering wheel as his car tore through the darkness of the interstate. His hands tightened around it while streetlights swept across his face like slices of passing time. On the passenger seat, a small voice recorder and an empty case file waited. To the world, this was a case of child abandonment. To Stephen, it was the beginning of a psychological crime scene investigation. At that moment, I didn't yet realize it. But the words "I will find the truth" would become the most important promise I would make in the next 10 years of my life. He caught the earliest possible flight and made his way from Decatur to Marietta. When he stood in front of his son's house, Stephen didn't ring the doorbell. Instead, he used the spare key he had never imagined needing under circumstances like these. The house was eerily silent. The faint scent of expensive scented candles still lingered in the air, an artificial kind of perfection. Stephen stepped into the living room. He didn't rush to call Skyla's name. Instead, he began observing. The trained eyes of a veteran family lawyer scanned the photo wall. 11 photographs. A number that spoke volumes. 11 shining moments of Alex, the favored grandson. Alex learning to swim. Alex receiving a soccer trophy. Alex smiling during a mountain vacation. There was only one picture of Skyla. She stood at the edge of last year's Christmas photo. While Alex wore an elegant velvet outfit, Skyla was dressed in a faded blue sweater, one far too large for her thin little frame. And in the photo, Skyla wasn't looking at the camera. Her eyes were fixed on something distant and undefined, as if she already knew she was nothing more than an unwanted addition to the frame. Stephen wrote in his notebook, "Evidence, a systematic discrimination through imagery." He found Skyla in the small bedroom at the back of the house. She was curled up on the bed like a question mark. When she saw him, she didn't run into his arms. She simply sat up. Her eyes, far too old for an 8-year-old, looked at him with relief, but also with a deep, quiet sadness. Stephen took Skyla to a small diner on the outskirts of town. The flickering neon lights created a neutral space. He slid a plate with a sandwich toward her. Skyla ate slowly like a rusty machine trying to start after years of neglect. Then she began to talk. Her voice carried no anger, only a painful acceptance. She told him about the school play her parents forgot to attend because they were busy taking Alex to buy new shoes. She told him about her 8th birthday, a hastily bought supermarket cake eaten in the kitchen, while Alex had just been given a lavish party at Great Wolf Lodge. Even the blue sweater from the photo had its own story. It was a hand-me-down from a relative. Natalie, her mother, had said Skyla grew too fast, so there was no need to buy new clothes. Meanwhile, Alex's closet was filled with brand-name outfits, many of them still with the tags on. Every word Skyla spoke felt like a blade cutting into Stephen's heart. He realized that his son hadn't just abandoned this child for one night. They had been abandoning her soul for years. If you've stayed with this story until now, please do me a small favor. Click the subscribe button. Many people watch the videos but never take that step. It costs you nothing, but it means a great deal to us. Thank you very much. Stephen looked at Skyla. She was using her finger to push crumbs around the plate. The contrast was unbearable. Outside stood the image of a perfect suburban home with a lush green lawn. Inside lived a silent, unspoken pain. On one side was the flawless appearance of a successful family. On the other was rot at the very core. Quietly, Stephen switched on the recorder beneath the table. "Skyla," he asked gently, "have you ever asked your parents why?" The girl looked up. The gaze of a soul far older than her 8 years made Stephen shiver. "I asked once," she said. "Dad said Alex is the future of the family. He said I'm just too sensitive. He said I always make things bigger than they are." Skyla's old soul was trapped inside an 8-year-old body. She had learned to make herself small to stay quiet so she wouldn't be a burden. But that silence was the loudest cry for help Stephen had ever heard. He stood up and placed a hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. This time he wasn't a lawyer collecting evidence. He was a grandfather declaring war against his own blood. He knew he would have to use the coldest skills of his profession to protect the last warm thing left in his life. The journey of gathering evidence had only just begun. What Stephen had found inside that house, and what he had heard from his granddaughter's own mouth, would become the first bricks in the case against his son. Stephen made a silent promise. Skyla would never again have to wear someone else's old sweater. She would never again be the child left behind. Stephen's car rolled back onto the road, heading toward the house in Marietta. There he would wait. Wait for the ones who had gone chasing happiness at Disney World to return with expensive toys and an empty conscience. Leave a comment if you believe the father's actions were unacceptable. And don't forget to subscribe to follow the tense confrontation in the next part. Stephen sat in the silent kitchen of his son's house in Marietta. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, falling across the polished granite countertop, shiny but cold. In his hand was the house phone. He was listening again to the voicemail messages in the inbox. Anthony's voice echoed through the speaker, sharp and impatient. "Skyla, I already told you, it's just a mild fever. Stop being so dramatic. Eat the pizza in the fridge and go to sleep. We'll be back on Sunday." Stephen felt a current run down his spine. It wasn't a burst of anger. It was the calculated fury of a lawyer. He set his fountain pen down on the legal pad. The dry scratch of the nib against the paper broke the silence. I lifted my legal notes and wrote 3 words, underlining them twice. Pattern of behavior. Evidence file. Court. This was no longer just a family matter. It was a case. Stephen began moving through the house, taking photographs. He photographed the empty refrigerator, with only the leftover pizza box inside. He photographed the thermometer left on the coffee table. He even photographed the doors that had been locked from the outside. Each picture was another blow against Anthony's parental rights. Then the sound of a car engine rolled into the driveway. Anthony and Natalie had returned. They stepped into the house carrying shopping bags printed with Mickey Mouse. Their skin was sunburned from days of fun under the Florida sun. Alex ran ahead of them laughing, wearing a brand new pair of Mickey ears. Stephen's presence in the dark kitchen made them stop in their tracks. Anthony frowned. "Dad, what are you doing here? Why did you come into my house without telling me?" Stephen didn't stand up. He slowly slid a brown envelope across the table toward his son. His voice was calm, like a man speaking before a courtroom. "I'm not here as your father," he said. "I'm here as Skyla's temporary legal guardian." Natalie let out an awkward laugh. "You're overreacting again. She was just a little sick, so we let her stay home to rest. She needs to learn to be independent." Stephen looked directly into his daughter-in-law's eyes. "Independence does not include being left alone with a fever and a microwave she can't even operate," he said quietly. "That's called child neglect." Anthony began to lose his temper. "You're going to sue your own son. You've lost your mind. No judge is going to listen to this." Stephen took a slow breath and stood up. His height and the quiet authority of a seasoned attorney filled the room. "I have recordings, I have photographs, and I have a pattern of behavior so clear I could present it to any judge in the state of Georgia and win before lunchtime." Silence fell over the room. Anthony took a step back. He knew his father never spoke lightly. In Stephen's world, truth didn't live in explanations. It lived in evidence. Stephen opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick case file. Inside were records of school performances that had been missed, medical bills, listing only Alex's name, and a photograph of Skyla's faded blue sweater. Anthony's arguments began to crumble. He tried to explain the pressure from work and Alex's needs. But every word he spoke only added another line to the indictment Stephen had already drafted in his mind. If you've been listening to this story for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it would mean a lot if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps everything running. Thank you, we truly appreciate it. Stephen gathered his documents. He looked at his son one last time, not with hatred, but with a deep, quiet disappointment. "You failed the most important test a father can face," he said. "You treated your daughter like a piece of furniture that could simply be left behind." Now Stephen wasn't waiting for a court order. He took Skyla's hand and led her toward the door. She held on to him tightly, her small fingers trembling but full of trust. Behind them, Anthony and Natalie stood frozen among their Disney World souvenirs. The Mickey Mouse ears suddenly looked ridiculous in a room now thick with the weight of legal consequences. The battle in the living room was over, but the battle in court had only just begun. Stephen knew he was risking his relationship with his own son, but that price was cheap compared to Skyla's future. The car rolled away from Marietta. The red glow of its taillights burned through the night like a warning. Justice for Skyla had been set in motion, and Stephen Collins would not stop until that justice was fully delivered. Follow the channel so you don't miss the emotional conclusion at the appellate court, where every final secret will be brought into the light. The Cobb County Superior Court stood before them with its towering white marble columns. The place carried an almost suffocating sense of authority. Judge Patricia Wynn sat high on the bench, her sharp eyes belonging to someone who had witnessed thousands of families fracture inside that very room. Stephen sat at the plaintiff's table. He was not wearing the suit of a practicing attorney today. He wore the role of a grandfather. Across from him sat Anthony. The arrogance that once filled his son's face was gone. In its place remained only exhaustion and disbelief. Stephen presented the case without dramatic speeches. Instead, he offered numbers, timelines, and photographs. He called it a pattern of exclusion, a system where a child slowly becomes a ghost inside her own home. Judge Wynn turned each page of the file carefully. She paused for a long moment at the photograph of Skyla's faded blue sweater. The courtroom was so quiet that the ticking of the clock could be heard. Anthony finally stood. His voice broke. He did not resist. The truth about the Disney World trip and the careless voicemail messages had shattered every excuse he might have offered. He admitted he had failed. His priorities had blinded him. The ruling came quickly, but it carried enormous weight. Primary custody was granted to Stephen. Anthony and Natalie were ordered to attend counseling, and would only be allowed supervised visitation. When Stephen stepped out of the courthouse, the golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the wide stone steps. At the bottom he saw Skyla waiting beside a flower bed. She looked so small against the massive limestone walls of the courthouse. Stephen walked toward her and gently took his granddaughter's small hands in his own. Skyla looked up at him. The fear was gone from her eyes, but one question still lingered, the same question that had weighed on her heart for 8 long years. She asked softly, "Grandpa, was I always the second choice because I wasn't good enough? Am I your first choice?" Stephen lowered himself onto one knee, so he was at her eye level. He held her thin shoulders gently, his voice warm but firm like a vow. "You are my only choice. You always have been." Those words were more than reassurance. They were the recognition every child in the world deserves. Skyla leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, her crying no longer sounded like a broken engine struggling to start. It was the sound of release. This story carries a powerful lesson about love. Family is not simply people who share the same blood and live under the same roof. Family is the place where no one is left behind. A new sweater or a distant vacation does not define wealth. True wealth lies in how we value each other's presence. Never let children grow up with old souls because of wounds they never deserved. Never let them question their own worth. Because every child deserves to be someone's first and only choice. Stephen took Skyla's hand and led her to the car. They drove toward the sunset over Decatur. A new chapter was beginning. No more evidence, no more indictments, only warm dinners and promises that would finally be kept. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by pressing like and subscribe to see more meaningful real-life stories about family. Life may bring many legal battles, but saving the soul of a child is the greatest victory attorney Stephen Collins could ever achieve. A victory that required no judge's gavel, only the peaceful smile on Skyla's face. Share your thoughts about this ending in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories.